Well, again, Georgism is interesting to me because it's not extreme capitalism and it's not extreme socialism either. It doesn't really seem to fit into that paradigm. Well, if we could maybe just sort of think about the spectrum between the two, and maybe you would characterize it differently, but could you explain why capitalists in the strictest sense are wrong to commodify land and to say that that can be capital or that can be property, or that it can be that it's not nature per se, that it is a piece of property?
Well, let me begin by talking about a name for the Georgist perspective in terms of capitalism and socialism. In the last 30 or 40 years, philosophers have come up with a term that characterizes the Georgist perspective, and that term is left libertarianism. Now, many people think of libertarianism as a rightist phenomenon, and so the idea of left libertarianism may seem a contradiction in terms. But the two fundamental principles of left libertarianism are also the two fundamental principles of Georgism. The left principle is that people have equal rights to the earth, and the libertarian principle is that people have full rights to themselves. And these principles do not conflict with each other. And they are one principle that one finds mostly on the left and another principle that one finds mostly on the right. So it is difficult to characterize the Georgist perspective in terms of left and right because it takes some of each. It's not between them. It's a mixture of parts of the two.
Well, it's kind of interesting for me to hear you say that, because when I hear left libertarianism, I typically think of Bakunin or Kropotkin. To the extreme, it would be like anarcho-communism. So isn't that philosophy, wouldn't you say that's flawed, that the workers should own the means of production and utilizing the labor theory of value? Isn't there any flaws in that general philosophy?
Yes, I think that the people you mentioned don't sound to me like left libertarians, because as I understand the perspective of left libertarianism anyway, the freedom that it entails includes the freedom to own the means of production. What people have equal rights to is not the means of production, but the gifts of nature. And that insistence that people have equal rights to the gifts of nature, but otherwise can accumulate whatever they like, is rather different from the anarcho-capitalism or anarchism.
Well, I'd also be interested if you could speak to the difference between Georgism and Mutualism, because it's actually, just to give you a little bit of insight, one reason that I personally have become very interested in Georgism lately is I took, they have these political quizzes online now, and you can answer a bunch of questions, and then it kind of places you on the political spectrum. So I took this one quiz one day, and I was categorized as a mutualist, and I took it another day, and I was categorized as a Georgist. So I guess, they're pretty close together. Mm-hmm. Can you speak to the similarities and also the differences between Henry George and Georgism or Geoism and the philosophy of Proudhon and Mutualism?
I probably don't know enough about Proudhon to do that, but let me talk a little bit about what I understand mutualism to be. And what I would say is that mutualism is something that is compatible with Georgism, but not required by Georgism. You could have Georgists who wanted no government at all, and you could have Georgists who want lots of government, and they would both be good Georgists. They would just have to live in different communities.
Okay, but as far as the land ownership or the rent question, there's really no difference there?
Well, both groups would say that the rent of land needs to be shared. And some people would say, take all the rent of land and collect it and return it to people equally and don't have any government at all. and other people would say take the rent of land and use it to provide public services. Both are acceptable implementations of the Georgist perspective. Another thing that I tend to associate with mutualism is the idea of people sharing ownership of factories and businesses. And again, if people want to share the ownership of factories and businesses, they should be free to do that. And if other people want to work for businesses that are owned by other people, that should be possible too. There's, in the Georgist perspective, there's no one right way to do such things. It should be possible for people to get together and form communities of different sorts with whatever institutions they like of that kind.
Another distinction, it seems, is that mutualists seem to believe as though land needs to be in use, that if you stop using a land, that you can't just be a rent collector. You have to actually continue occupying and using a land. Do Georgists generally agree with that, or can I, as a landowner or someone who pays tax on a given plot of land, can I leave for years and continue to be the owner or title holder or property owner of that piece of land?
I think what Georgists would say is that it would be a very wasteful thing for even a rich person to do, to continue to pay the taxes on land year after year just for the pleasure of owning it if he wasn't there. It would be so expensive to do that, and the selling price of the land would be next to zero no matter what you did, as long as it was unimproved. It just would be so unrewarding that it would be hard to imagine anybody wanting to do that. And anybody who did want to do it would have to pay the cost imposed on society by his doing it. And so if somebody really wanted to do it, we could let him do it and say, and laugh all the way to the bank with the money we were taking from him.